assorted ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. When Aidan Connolly asked me to be one of the honoured recipients for this year's Spirit of Ireland, I was of course flattered and delighted to accept. I would be joining a list of eminent persons whose work and activities has somehow embodied that rather abstract but nonetheless real perception of what infuses the notion of Irishness. So it set me thinking, what does the Spirit of Ireland mean as we stand in the foyer of the 21st century? Sure, we have a massive historical tapestry to ponder in the search for our sense of ourselves, from Cuchulainn to the Commitments, from the Book of Kells to Ulysses, from Brian Boru to Brian O'Driscoll, from Daniel O'Connell to Daniel O'Donnell, from Micheál MacLiamore to Gabriel Byrne and Liam Neeson, from Yeats to Colin McCann and Frank McCourt, from Robert Emmet to Pádraig Pearse and to JFK. These and many others provide us with our sense of Irishness. And beneath this upper crust of national iconography, there is a potent Irish stew of characteristics that are added to the recipe. Some are more digestible than others, but they include our generosity, our verbosity, our religiosity, our musicality, our joviality, and our artificiality, our hospitality, our neutrality, and our rascality. Our capacity to welcome the stranger while at the same time shunning chosen outsiders. Our ability to stand shoulder to shoulder against any foe while fighting fiercely amongst ourselves. All of these conflicting characteristics go to making up the Irish persona. As my mother once said about a wayward friend of mine, we're complicated, God help us. I've been lucky to have spent some of my... Sorry, Mum. I've been lucky to have spent some of my recent years wandering the world and observing how the Irish are perceived and perceive themselves in many parts of the globe. If I may, I'd share a few stories from my travels. As a composer of that Irish music and dance show, which we've referred to earlier tonight, my cousin, actually, in that gorgeous Irish way that keeps us well on the ground, she rang me once looking for tickets and she said, "Hey, Bill, how are you? Can you get me some tickets for river thing?" One of the advantages of being a composer of a theatre show is that you have no physical profile like the stars have. So you can mouse around in the bar in the interval and listen to what people are saying. I remember in the early life of Riverdance being in London. At the interval, this very large, prosperous, double-breasted, pinstriped, military-type gentleman bounded down the stairs to the bar where he and his friends had a bottle of champagne waiting. They were in high spirits, and after he mimicked a few steps of breathless and rather teetering Irish dance, he announced to his friends, "You know, I love the Irish." Everyone agreed. And there was a communal clinking of glasses. His face clouded over briefly for a moment as he added a sober admonition, "But I do rather hate it when they start going on about the history." Then I remember, as the flame of the Northern Irish peace process, salute, Madam Ambassador, was beginning to take hold, being at a dinner which was hosted by Tom Moran of Mutual of America. Go Mutual. Support the IrishArtsCenter. The keynote speaker was the impressive Lord Alderdice, the room was filled with representatives of all shades of opinion, north and south of the border. I found myself seated beside the then prominent northern politician with strong unionist paramilitary connections, Gary McMichael. Gary's father was the leader of the UDA. After John Alderdice finished his excellent speech, Gary McMichael turned to me and said, "So, Bob, so you wrote Riverdance, eh?" Yes, I said. He said, I saw that recently in Belfast, actually. He said, I quite liked it. His surprise at the reaction to a show based on Irish traditional music and dance was only equaled by my realization that things were looking up and our two communities on the island were starting to notice things to like about each other. Recently, I had the wonderful experience of watching our troupe of dancers and musicians break new ground in China. Well, at least I thought it was new ground. We were preparing to shoot a video in Beijing. It was one of those freezing days on that cold continent where an Irishman dreams of a toasted corned beef sandwich and a pint of Guinness in front of an open fire in a pub in Connemara. The stage manager came up and informed me that we were going to take a 30-minute break to allow our dancers to do a workshop. A workshop, I said, with whom? At that moment, the large double doors opened and in padded 40 Chinese Irish dancers. For the next half an hour, I stood transfixed as these wonderful young Asian girls and guys pounded their way through several Riverdance routines, stopping occasionally to take the note or advice from our choreographers. I thought of that bar in Connemara, and in the great hall of the people in Beijing on that day, it suddenly seemed very near. On a more somber note, I recalled somebody telling me about a massive party they attended, which was hosted by a very successful businessman with Irish roots. It was his birthday. There were hundreds of people at this glittering event, and the highlight of the evening's entertainment was the showing of a video of Riverdance on a large screen in the dance hall. As the guests were leaving, the hosts were saying goodbye at the door. He shook hands with my friend and asked him if he'd enjoyed the party and what did he think of the video. He said, well, it was very good. He said, I'd actually seen the show. It seemed a little bit shorter than the show as I remembered. And he said, well, we cut out all that Spanish, Russian, and African stuff. You try. Our birthday boy was missing the point. Sure, like many small nations fighting for their place in a global world, we sometimes moved forward at the expense of others. But that time has long passed, and we are edging closer to being able to write Robert Emmet's epitaph, as he hoped, my country takes its place among the nations of the earth. Of course, we in Ireland have also suffered from occasional neuroses about tradition and purity. Notions about purity in the arts run, I believe, counter to the creation of all good art. Show me a purist, and I'll show you a heart full of fear. In fact, there is something chaotic, anarchic, unpredictable about the creative process. Certainly, technical ability may be required, but the core cauldron of creativity can bubble and spurt outside of anyone's control, even the artists. From time to time, there may be a political or social message, but the condition of all art is to breathe freely in the world, sans frontières, or sans frontières, as the French say. Recently, Riverdance played in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. Like many times before, playing in a foreign country reinforces the subtle human and cultural connections that exist between peoples. The Israeli audiences verified this by the warmth with which they received the Irish musicians and dancers. Some people saw our appearance in Israel as a validation for a political ideology. As the writer of the show, I can tell them they're wrong. We were there to entertain and to stimulate, and anyone who wants political or other views validated or repudiated will have to look elsewhere. Like the ancient itinerant pipers of Ireland, we will play in anyone's house if invited, but our opinions remain our own. Now, another thing we Irish know a lot about, and we do know a lot of stuff, Gabriel, is physics. Take, for example, Flann O'Brien's molecular theory in his novel The Third Policeman. Through constant atomic friction between a cyclist's backside and the saddle, a man runs the risk of gradually turning into his own bicycle. A startling insight, you will agree. And let's see, what else do we know? Oh yeah, we know another thing about science. It's a slightly less surreal level, but we do know this. As a meteor or other small astral body passes close to a larger planet, the arc of its orbit is changed. Now, what has that got to do with this evening? Nothing. Or perhaps everything. The Irish Arts Centre, as it stands now, is just like that planet. Its capacity to change the arc in the careers of many artists, performers, dancers, writers, actors, painters, and musicians is enormous. And if the vision for its future is supported as it is here this evening, then the size of that planet and the sphere of its influence will increase proportionately. We Irish are people of dualities. We have two nations, two anthems, two presidents called Mary, and we have our two communities, the one that lives on that small island back home, and the massive dispersed community around the world, particularly here in the United States. Right at the nexus, the Irish Arts Centre will be in a powerful position to mediate, translate, and give voices to the shifts and changes that take place within those communities. This week, I stood in a queue at immigration entering the USA. Beside me was a man leading a group of young musicians from Coltas Kiltory Éireann who were embarking on a tour of America. We discussed the state of young musicianship. Jesus, Bill, he says, they're brimming with confidence. He says, they're playing jazz, they're playing classical, and they're playing trad. There's no stopping them. That is the spirit of the broader Ireland of 2011. As all these great rivers converge, this Centre for Irish Arts in New York stands, to borrow from Thomas Moore, at the meeting of the waters. This evening, I am proud to stand there with them, and I am honoured to accept this award. Thank you.